Somewhere around the year 2009, I was beginning to go through this very intense spiritual awakening. That's the best phrase that I have to describe all of it. Spiritual awakening. I can't say for sure that it started in that year, but there was a lot happening. And the next year, and the year after that. But 2009, in that year, I think a lot of us found each other online, and a lot of us were going through something similar or something relatable. Of course, our own version of spiritual awakening. But we found each other. Some of you are still here. And now that so much time has passed, I feel more comfortable speaking about this topic. And I have made a video on this very channel about this topic, but I framed it almost strictly through the context of mental health. And I feel that that was a mistake. And overall, the way that I explored the subject matter, it just wasn't great. Not that it will be perfect in this video, but I wanted to revisit this topic because I have since I had made that video private at some point because I didn't like the way that I covered everything. And anyway, I don't believe what I'm about to discuss started in 2009. I think it was 2010. The reason I guess I don't know or I don't have this recorded, written down somewhere, is that after all of this was over with, and I will get to that point later in this video, after it was all over with, I actually burned in a formal ritual, if you will, a self-created ritual. I burned all of my journals that had anything to do with any of this. I recently found one actually that was separate, and I'm glad I have that. But anyway, the fine details are gone and lost forever because of me burning those journals and notebooks in which I think I attempted to record or document a lot of what was happening to me. And maybe, hopefully, by the end of this video, it will make sense why I did that. So, I believe it was 2010 at some point. I became interested in connecting with my guide, my quote unquote guide, my spirit guide. I believed at that time that we all had guides, and I had been, probably since 2009 or even before, I had been exposed to characters online who were channeling guides or channeling beings. Some of them claimed to be channeling beings from other star systems or other planets or other dimensions. Some of them were channeling their guide or possibly guides or some kind of collective. I became fascinated with this information because so much of the information resonated with me very deeply. And somehow, I don't remember how, but I became aware of this book called Opening to Channel. I don't remember who the author was off the top of my head, but the book was called Opening to Channel, and the book teaches us how to open a direct line of communication with our guide and how to form that bond and to, I guess, play a more active role in that relationship, and ultimately how to channel messages from them. And this was the beginning of a very strange phase in my life. It was the beginning of a string of complications with my spiritual awakening, if you will. And I don't blame the book or the author or anything like that. I don't believe that the creation of this book had any type of sinister motives behind it. But I guess when it comes to the state of mind that I was in, or maybe it's just my own psychology and never having had any of these experiences that I'm about to describe, it turns out that it was not a good idea for me to involve myself with any of this way of thinking. And none of this video, none of these events or perspectives that I'm about to explore, uh, I guess I'm not trying to say that one thing is true and another thing isn't. I'm really trying to explore all possibilities, or at least a couple possibilities here. But anyway, what I can recall was that in the beginning, I felt that I did make contact with my guide. I felt that I did successfully open a line of communication there. And around this time, I was seeing so many, I was experiencing so many synchronicities, or should I say, synchronicity itself had entered my life. And I was always seeing signs and numbers and messages, if you will, that I was on the right path. And I interpreted these to be from my guide. This is what I can vaguely remember from the beginning. And I would often sit where previously I would have been sitting in silent meditation. I would often sit and open that line of communication again and try channeling messages directly from my guide. And looking back, it's like I was giving my vessel over to what I believed to be my guide, and just being completely open to these messages and allowing them to pass through me, right? And everything started very pure. I mean, the feeling was not bad at all. There was nothing, I mean, it was all good. I felt amazing, to be honest. I remember nothing but positive feelings in the beginning. And I don't know how to describe this, and maybe it would have helped if I didn't burn those journals, but and I say I don't know how to describe it because it wasn't so clear. It was such a gradual process of me in the beginning feeling like I was in contact with my guide. And then it changed into, like I mentioned earlier, like I was communicating with some kind of collective. I later felt that this collective was actually, I don't want to say the Greys, but it was like a group of Greys. Maybe it was the Greys. But Greys, these famous alien characters that we know of. I was having dreams in which I saw craft. I sometimes saw them land in front of me. I remember a dream that I was in my elementary school, and in broad daylight, a metallic disc craft flew very low overhead, hovered, and then landed in the kind of the black top of the area where we would have recess. And children formed a circle around this craft. And I could see through a porthole window kind of the top of the head of one of these grays. And I knew there were grays inside. I remember other dreams where, one in particular, where a craft actually landed. In the dream, I was at a sort of music festival with a friend of mine and his parents. Similarly, but the craft was a different shape. I saw a craft fly low overhead. It landed just not too far away. I ran to it and I entered it. Inside of the craft, I remember seeing my sister. In reality, my sister is older than me by almost 3 years. In the dream, my sister was a toddler, and I was my current age at the time. She was on a conveyor belt. I was also on a conveyor belt. She was going in a different direction. I remember grabbing her and trying to. I did. I brought her onto my side because she was being separated from me. I never saw any beings in this craft, but there was a sort of intercom system with a very generic voice, like what we hear if we use like a computer, like if I do a text to speech feature with any type of technology these days. You know, you can hear it's like sometimes it's the voice of a woman, sometimes it's the voice of a man, but it's very clearly not organic. I don't remember what the messages were, but messages were being broadcast. I remember seeing children's toys on the side next to the conveyor belt, the part that was not moving. I'm just very quickly kind of skimming past some of these, and there were other dreams where I was in the presence of grays. I even remember a dream where I was in a swamp at night, and in the water were the bodies, like dead bodies of grays. But in that dream, they were very tall, 6, 7 feet tall. I mean, maybe between 6 to 8 feet tall, really long, lanky grays. They weren't short like they always are in other dreams, but they were dead bodies in a bog like in a swamp somewhere. Anyway, the point is, let me backtrack and just stay with this line of thought here. What started out as my guide then became, and this took place over the course of like 2 years, so it was a very gradual process. And anyway, I was still, even when I believed that it was this group of grays. Well, I will say this. During that time, I remember feeling that the communications from the messages, the channeling of this group, this collective, it was all coming from our moon. I remember looking at the moon, and for a short time, relatively speaking, I became almost like obsessed with the moon. I would just stare at it. I would go out at night, or just be out at night sometimes, and I would stare at it. And what I remember is that now it's like quite some time had passed, and I hadn't been actually meditating anymore. Anytime that I sat in silence where I could have been meditating, I was obsessed with opening that line of communication and receiving messages. And I'd like to make a side note that during all of this and what I'm about to say, during the entire thing that lasted 2 years at least, I never heard there were no auditory hallucinations, there were no visual hallucinations, there was no break from reality. This was all taking place within my own mind, in the privacy of my own thoughts. It was belief, delusional belief perhaps, thoughts and mixed with the dreams that I was having. But it was all based in belief. And anyway, well, I guess another side note, years later, actually not that long ago, so years after this was all over with, again, this happened, like I said, 2010 or something like that is when things got weird. Um, but not too long ago, my dad, of all people, started to tell me that one day he told me that he had seen this video. He was watching a video on remote viewing and how various governments have been involved in studying this and using or hiring people who know how to do that, um, and sort of, I guess, using it to have some kind of strategic advantage over one another. And I guess he had watched a video on this, and he said that in one of these stories in the video, there was an individual who performed remote viewing, and what they were viewing was our moon. And inside of the moon, it was either that the moon was hollow or that there was an underground base in the moon. And this individual looked into that underground base and they saw a bunch of grays in there. And the grays became aware of the fact that they were being observed, and they looked right at him, and then he snapped back. And all these years later, after I'm so like disconnected from all of this stuff that happened in the past, and it's been completely resolved, and I'm now and have been for many years in a much more grounded state. I thought that was very interesting that my dad told me that. Looking back, where I had this obsession with the moon and my belief that I was receiving messages from grays. I didn't necessarily believe that they were on the moon. I thought maybe somehow it was like a transmitter or it was something was reflecting, and whatever the details were. I mean, clearly this was all mixed up. It was one thing, then it was another, then it was the next. And what it became next, once again, I don't understand the transition. It was so seamless and so gradual that I don't recall how, but I ended up slowly coming to the conclusion, or the realization is really what the experience was. I felt that I was realizing slowly that I actually had a demon that had attached itself to me. And so maybe, again, this is all belief. So I believed that, I mean, it sure seemed like what all of this was that when I had originally opened that line of communication, attempting to communicate with or connect with my so-called guide, I had somehow accidentally or unknowingly invited anything in. And that anything turned out to be a demon. I had experiences, and a lot of this, it reminds me of what I have read about mania. And this was a more short-lived experience, but near the peak of like the kind of negative stuff, the negative side effects of this whole experience. I remember walking around outside, and mind you, I should have said this earlier, during this entire experience. So this was after high school, right? I was not in school. I did not have a job. I did not have a goal. I did not have an exercise routine. I did not have a daily schedule of any kind. I was absolutely and totally floating through life during this phase of time. It's like in the beginning, like way before the opening to channel stuff and everything was fine. It's like my mind, everything had just been blown wide open as a result of this like spiritual awakening. I was so open to everything. And that's kind of what led me down that path, I guess, to letting something in me like that. And it might seem like I'm not committing to one view or another, and I really don't know how at this point. And that's why I wanted to revisit this topic, because the last time that I spoke about it, it was only saying, okay, it was all a mental health episode and it was all in my head. But if I'm being honest with you, the experience was that I had invited a demon into my life and that it was manipulating my thoughts. Again, there were no auditory hallucinations, no visual hallucinations. It was all delusional in nature. It was all mental. Everything was coming from the mind. I was absolutely in my mind. I had no anchor. I was the opposite of what grounded is during this window of time. And I feel like I go back and forth on this because I never sought treatment. Let's say it was a mental health crisis or something. I never sought treatment. No one around me, and I've always been around my family, no one around me said, hey, maybe you should get some help. Um, and maybe this is because I wasn't working and I wasn't in school and there wasn't like anything for it to even get in the way of. Maybe that's why. But I would imagine that if this really was a manic episode or just a mental health crisis in general, that somebody around me who loved and cared about me would have tried to help. Because, like I said earlier, this really was all happening in the privacy of my own mind. Um, so that leads me to believe, I mean, the fact that it never continued and it was not a pattern that we would call a disorder, like a mood disorder or a personality disorder. These things tend to be patterns. That's how diagnosis occurs. It's a pattern, a repeating pattern. But this was like just it was like a linear experience. And I know I'm going through this very slowly, but by the end of it, it was just over. And it's never happened again. And it never can happen again because that whole thing, that whole chapter ended. And I've been living a completely normal life ever since. And even at the time, again, on the outside looking in, uh, everything was relatively normal. This was all happening in my mind. But it did reach the point where I felt that I was tormented by this force that had entered my life. I started to have, and I'll go back for a second, some of those dreams about the Greys were pretty uncomfortable, but nothing was like terrifying. I never felt actual fear, but I also didn't feel so much warmth. It was largely neutral with some discomfort. And actually at one point, though this was probably in the second year of all of this stuff happening, I did have a dream, which I have a video of on this channel. I'll probably put a link in the description. But I had a dream that what seemed to be extraterrestrial beings were performing surgery on my back. A needle was inserted vertically into my upper back, like long ways with my spine in the spinal column. That was highly uncomfortable. I did not feel fear. I felt numb in many ways, but I could feel the needle in my back, and that was a very uncomfortable dream that I had during this time. And anyway, fast forward sometime after that. So I remember dreams that felt like they were being entirely controlled by an unseen force, and that my mind was being tormented, like true nightmares. And I never really had nightmares. And to this day, I don't tend to have nightmares. If I have a nightmare, I mean, anything that I might call a nightmare these days, and for a long time, it's just that it's a dream that a loved one dies, you know? It's a tragic situation, and I'm just sad and I'm upset by it, but it's not like a supernatural force, a supernatural unseen force playing with me or toying with me. But I started to have experiences in my dreams like this. Like I knew, and again, whether it was true or not true, I felt that I knew what was happening, and that I needed to stop this. You know, another thing that was happening near the tail end. So if we look at it like it's three phases: guide, aliens, and then demon. In the third and final phase, I became aware of the fact that for a long time now I had highly negative self-talk. And it's funny again how smooth the transition really was, because I wasn't like that in the beginning. But I'd reached a state where it was just like a profound level. There was a profound level of negative self-talk in my own mind. I became aware of that. And the thing is, there's a lot that I'm leaving out. I have read since that when someone is in the presence of a demon, that they may smell sulfur or rotting flesh. Like in the physical space, even though it's what you might call a supernatural force, that smell is there. I've read that about like haunted locations. I guess haunted isn't the right word if it's a demon, but I've read that. That's a thing. I didn't know that at the time, but I had that experience in the middle of all this. Just one time. But I remember later on reading about that and thinking, well, that sure is strange. And then similarly reading and learning through, I guess, content or through others sharing their experiences about demons, that they can't come into your life unless you let them in. Or in my case, formally invite them in. Um, yeah. So again, this was a long time ago. This was now over 11 years ago. A little bit more, maybe. I mean, it's it's blurry, to be honest with you, the how it all ended. And it's really intentional. I mean, like again, with me burning all of that stuff because I was trying to keep track of this. I was taking notes and stuff, and when it was all over, I was so happy that it was over that I burned everything and made it, made it official, if you will. But what I remember was that there was a moment when I had absolutely had enough. I was at my wit's end with what was taking place within my own mind. And I sat down and I prayed. That is to say, I formally addressed God. I formally addressed the one true God, the Most High. Not a religious God, not any God that is written about in anyone's religion, but the one true God. I sat down and I prayed. I sat down and I formally opened a line of communication between God and myself. That is to say that I faced God for the first time, surely since all of this stuff had started, since the opening the channel, since the interest in contacting collectives or beings or guides or any of that stuff. I had not actually It's as though that entire time, without even realizing that that is what I was doing, I had turned my back. I had turned my back even on the concept, let alone the one true God. But I turned my back even on the concept. It was, um, I felt profound shame in that moment, sitting before God, and I wept. I wept deeply. I cried completely. I felt so ashamed that I had allowed all of this to happen. And that it's like in that moment, I felt how long that really was. I felt how much time had passed where I didn't even think about God. I was completely preoccupied with this other thing. I was completely distracted by these experiences and whatever else it was that I thought I was focusing on or that I thought I was communicating with. Whether that was just me communicating with my own mind or it was an actual demon that had attached itself to me, latched on, if you will, and manipulated my thoughts. So whether it was a real demon or it was all imaginary, and the entire thing was just the result of an overactive imagination and not being grounded in any way, shape, or form in life and just freely exploring your own imagination with no guardrails. Whichever side of that is the truth, the result was the same. The result was that I had turned my back on God, acted like there is no God, and the result was the same. I go back and forth on this all the time. And what it is this. There's one side of me that feels I had the experience of what there's one side of me that feels that what all of that was that I had unknowingly at the time invited anything into me, and it happened to be a demon. I opened myself up to whatever. A demon entered my life and toyed with me for, I think, almost 3 years, roughly. And when I formally gave my life back to God, it all went away in a flash. It was just gone. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden the sunshine came out and I was this perfect human. I had sort of devolved. I wasn't well. From that point moving forward, I had to focus on healing. I had to heal. I had to do a lot. And I have done a lot. Again, looking back 10, 11 years ago, I have done so much. And I've come so far since that point. But there's another side of me that really wants to believe that no, it was all in my head and it was all just created by my own imagination and none of it was real. None of it had any weight. That's what I want to believe, because if that, I guess either way, to be honest, speaking about this will cause others to think, wow, this person is crazy, you know? Like, whichever side I were to choose, if I were to make an official statement saying this side or the other side, it's crazy to most people that I know. But my experience is that I believe it was actually a demon, that I opened myself to demons, and that I was being toyed with, because that's exactly what the experience was. But I want to believe that that's not the case. It's like I want to believe, oh, that it was just all in my head, and I created the whole thing. But again, either way, and I go back to this idea all the time with almost everything, whether or not it was something real outside of myself or it was just from within myself, like some very disturbing creation of my own. It doesn't actually change what the result of that action was, of that interaction. I felt that I learned, well, it's not learned. I just felt that I had an experience of coming face to face with true evil. And something, I just realized at an earlier point in this video, I was approaching this idea and then I got sidetracked. And this is when I was talking about saying something about mania and reading about mania. There were moments, it was very short lived, but in a short amount of time, again, near the tail end. And this is what would make me feel like, or at the time when I was trying to figure out what was actually going on, it made me feel like, okay, it's probably mania. It could be an episode of mania. Maybe I have bipolar disorder. And it was that I lived the experience of walking around and feeling like I was out in public walking around, but I wasn't doing anything crazy. That's the thing with this. It wasn't like I had no reason to be hospitalized. It wasn't so extreme. I wasn't standing in traffic. But I was out in public and I walked across like I walked to the next city. And I remember feeling like I was Christ himself. Like that elevated sense of purpose or sense of self or whatever. I mean, I had experiences of feeling like Christ himself, and then maybe a different day around that time period, I felt like Satan himself. I was going through so many strange experiences during that time, and it was so chaotic, and I felt so tired of all of it, and I was so tormented by all of it. But this is what I don't, understand. And the reason I'm talking about this, and the reason that I will upload this, is because in the previous video trying to talk about this topic that I had uploaded on this channel, there was at least one individual who said that they couldn't believe what they were hearing, that they had the exact same experience, and that they wanted to talk more about it. Or the point is that if this matters to one person, I feel like it's worth sharing. If somebody can feel like they're not alone in this. But what's strange to me about all of this was that, again, a mood disorder, a personality disorder, things that I've read about where I can kind of like fit some of these experiences into that framework, into that clinical framework. They all imply a pattern. I mean, it would imply that I had that experience and that was just the first of many to come, but there were no more to come. This was a window of time where these things happened, and it all ended when I gave my life back to God. I gave my heart back to God, and I wept. And that moment was so important to me. And I didn't plan on any of that. I mean, I didn't know. I guess I was helpless. And that's why I cried. That's why I felt so ashamed, because it was like I had to put myself through all of that. I had to go through all of that. I had to invite something else into me in order to have faith. I needed like proof somehow looking back. It's as though that's what was happening. Like the whole reason I did all of that was that I needed proof that real evil exists in order to believe in God, in order to actually be with God, which was so strange now that I've come so far and I'm here. But again, my thought is this. So if it were a mental disorder that was causing all of this, because I know it sounds so crazy, right, to most people, how can it be that simply by giving my life back to God and walking with God again, turning back to God, if you will, how could it be that that just brought an end to all of it? Yes, like I said, I was in a not the best place from that point, but I've healed so much and I've come so far and it's all over. Like how is there no pattern? And then it makes me wonder. Again, I'm just exploring possibilities. I actually am open to both, which is why this is I feel like this might be interesting to share all of this. Whether it was all my own doing, my own sick imagination that came up with this stuff, or if it was a demon or something demonic. I wonder if there are others who went through similar experiences and then they immediately went down the clinical route and simply through belief, they believed that, okay, I have a mental disorder. I've now, especially once you're diagnosed by an authority figure who you give some power to. I mean, I can imagine an individual, or I guess I wonder if it's possible that someone could have gone through the same thing that I did, but they adopted the belief that it was not anything demonic, even though that's what it feels like. They've adopted the belief that it's a mental disorder and they need medication and, just going the clinical route in general. And I wonder if there is anyone who made that decision and then it did become a pattern because let's say it really is a demon, they never addressed that reality. Maybe they still haven't addressed that reality and they still haven't done what they need to do in order to get rid of a demon, so to speak. What if by not believing or not acknowledging the fact that it is a demon and instead saying, oh, no, 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 that doesn't exist. This is just illness that I'm going to have the rest of my life. I'm just going to the best I can to be okay. And what if they do that and they thereby allow this demon to remain attached to their life indefinitely for decades or possibly an entire lifetime? I wonder about that all the time. Like what would it have been like if I did that? Because the power of belief is really what this whole video is all about, right? The power of belief of the human mind is insane. It's insane how powerful belief is and how much it can shape your experience, how much it can create experiences for you. And it even has effects on your physical body. The power of belief is absolutely insane. And I wonder if there are people who are suffering indefinitely, like they have cycles of this, phases of this demonic activity, but they're unwilling to accept the fact that that's what it is. So they just let it keep happening. They let it stay there. And I'm speaking about this. I know this probably comes off like incredibly, it could be offensive to somebody who is legitimately suffering from some form of mental illness that involves a lot of what I spoke about. But that's what I'm trying to figure that out for myself. I'm trying to figure it out by talking about it. How can this be that it all went away? Right? And it could just have to do with I was raised Catholic, and this framework exists within my own mind of good and evil, and maybe that's what I needed for myself to just stop with the delusional thinking that I had a demon. It was all delusional thinking. It was never a real demon. It was just me with an overactive, unhinged imagination, and I had to use the framework that already existed in my mind from a very young age to sort of neutralize what was going on. I don't know, but I do find that I find it interesting because I've shared part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is I recently shared this with some people, and their response, it was through text, but the response is basically like, the pills, take your pills. You know, they imply that yeah, I'm crazy. But I feel more comfortable again speaking about this because this was such a long time ago, and I'm so far disconnected from that. And nothing like that has ever happened since, and nothing like that ever happened before. It really was the experience of inviting a demon into my life unknowingly, suffering to the point until the point that I couldn't take it anymore, and then essentially formally, I didn't mention this, I guess, but it was almost at the same time, in the same moment as I address God. It's like I'm formally addressing the situation, the reality, which to me at the time, the reality that I perceived was that there was a demon. So it was addressing the demon and telling it directly that it is to leave my life and to leave my space and never return. But with no doubt behind that. Because I feel that if somebody, let's say again, let's go back, demons are real. Let's say that you have a demon attached to you. If you suggest to it that it should leave, or you would like it a lot if it would leave, I don't believe that it will. That is to say, if you have any doubt in your mind that you have the power to make it leave, then it won't leave. It's that simple, and that's how I feel it all started in the first place. I had this unconscious or subconscious belief in that attempts to contact a guide that something like this was possible. Believing that it was possible literally it's like I left myself open for this possibility, and then it happened. And after, again, years later, it's so much time has passed, but that experience that I went through within my mind for that stretch of time has left me, I mean, even shortly thereafter, but especially now, it's left me in a place where nothing like that could ever happen again. Because I understand what that is. I understand what it feels like. I understand how foolish I was to even entertain the idea. And I've been moving steadily in the opposite direction ever since. Of course, there's hiccups and there's ups and downs in life itself, but I mean, mentally, I was just so lost during that time. And again, it goes hand in hand with what you will read about demons. Like maybe you don't believe in that, right? But there are those who do, and all of this goes hand in hand with that. Like demons literally prey on those who are people like who I was. Just lost floaters. No discipline, no nothing, just absolutely floating. Um, and just absolutely ungrounded. Anyway, for now, I think I'm done talking about this, but and I don't expect anyone who's ever been through something similar to even tell me that because it's a lot. I mean, this is like really, like I said, this was all happening in the privacy of my own mind. I don't recall telling anyone about this. There in the beginning when I believed it was my guide, there were some people for sure, and I even made videos about that if I recall correctly. On my previous We Are Living Magic channel, I remember videos where I'm pretty sure I was blatantly saying, you know, what I believed I was doing, which was channeling a guide. And I'm sure the messages seemed quite harmless in the beginning. But it all devolved, like I said, through time, very slowly, very sneakily, creepily. It all devolved into me being in a state where I couldn't even sit and be silent and just perform what I would call like vipassana meditation, right? Just to sit and watch my thoughts go by and focus on the breath. It devolved to the state where like my mind, it's like I was constantly, I felt that I was constantly in communication with this flow of this income of thoughts that were not mine. Thoughts which ultimately became demonic. And I just wonder what would happen if I didn't even believe in God. If I didn't even believe, if I didn't even know that there was a God that I could turn to, I wonder what would have become of me or that entire string of events, because it was devolving very steadily into a negative direction. And I wonder what would have happened if I had like medicated myself. Again, if I had gone the clinical route and medicated myself and sort of numbed or hidden the symptoms, the negative symptoms of that experience from myself, and just kept going along, letting this thing be attached to me. I wonder about that all the time. And I read about people and I see people, and I wonder if that's a possibility. Could it be possible that there are many people going around and they think they have a mental illness, but it's really a demon? Or is it vice versa? Are there these people that think that they have a demon to attach to them, but they really need to go the clinical route in order to heal? Maybe it's a combination for some people. But I recently spoke with an individual. Again, it was through text, it's through the internet, but I spoke with an individual who, it sure sounds like they had a very, very similar experience to mine. But in a way, it's like their experience continues. They continue to be tormented. They continue to be unable to, I guess, enforce discipline in their life and create structure and really start to create a life for themselves. Because this was all happening. This all happened when I was just in this in-between state. I was not in school. I was not working. I had not even a single goal in mind. I was just like exploring my own mind or exploring consciousness or just exploring possibilities or whatever. Like looking back, in my opinion, I was a little bit too open, too welcoming to such experiences, which is why it was allowed to happen in the first place. But after speaking with that individual recently about this, or sharing this information, and them sharing very similar information about their past, it made me want to talk about it again. Because again, I'm just going to repeat myself again, but for those who may have had something similar, I think it's good to talk about this stuff. And for everyone else, they're just going to think that I'm crazy or that you're crazy. But this was, at least within my own mind, this was a very real experience that I had all those years ago. And it ended. Yes, I had to do a lot of work, and the work never ends. But it ended quite abruptly. All of the, as far as the dreams and the negative self-talk and all of that, everything became much easier. The chaos ended. The very strange, again, what I would describe as demonic thought forms came to an end when I formally addressed God and gave my life back to God and started focusing on God. Again, please don't confuse this word God with any religion that you may associate with that word. I did not start practicing any religion suddenly. I'm not saying I went back to religion. I'm not saying I went back to the church. I'm speaking about the one true God, the Most High. There's nothing higher. I'm speaking about the Most High, not some sort of demigod or some advanced extraterrestrial race that may have had something to do with our own creation here on Earth. I'm not speaking about anything like that. I'm speaking about the Most High. Pure love. I gave my life back to love. When you have a demon attached to you, or simply when you are engaging with demonic thought forms, there is no love. There's not even room for love. It doesn't exist to you. You can't fathom it. You can't even believe it. You use other thought forms to explain it away. A demonic entity thrives in the mind. It doesn't really want to leave the mind. It stays in the mind. Because within the mind, or using the mind, using thoughts, just pure thought, using thought, all of it can be explained away. They can explain God away, or convince, one can convince their self that there is no God. One can convince their self that there is no love. It's a really hopeless state to find yourself in. And yeah, there were many missing elements in my life that, like when I said I needed to do a lot of work, but I had been for that entire stretch of time where all of that crazy shit happened, I was absolutely and utterly trapped in my mind. Forget about a job, forget about a goal, forget about going to school. I didn't even have an exercise routine. I didn't have anything. There was no progress taking place in my life. There was no, you start here, step 1, step 2, step 3, you get better at a thing. There was no progress. Not anything substantial, that's for sure. And I saw what happens when you just let your imagination run wild, unhinged, and believe it to be the truth. That's how it happens when you believe in your own thoughts, At least in my case. Again, let's flip back to the thought that none of this is real, there's no demons. I learned that my imagination is, or in my case, it's dangerous to explore the imagination. I learned that my imagination is capable of very dark things. And it's not enjoyable. It's not a good place to be. It doesn't feel good. It's not productive. It doesn't lead to anything that is positive. And when I see others that are in a similar state, because I know exactly what it's like, I do often catch myself wondering if demons are real, if they have a demon. Because I've come across these individuals and they normally don't speak about God. They normally aren't focusing on God. They might even curse God if you were to bring them up. Or they might, they might laugh. It's a very unproductive place to be. But I'm aware of many people who are stuck there. So, yeah, in whichever way it may be, hopefully you were entertained by this video, or maybe it had some kind of value for you, or maybe now you just have a good reason to discount anything I say from here on out and believe that I'm crazy or something. But thank you guys for listening to this, and have a great day. I'll see you next time.